You are listening to the Digital and Social Media Sports Podcast. Thanks so much for listening. I am your host, Neil Horowitz. You can find me on Twitter at NJH287, also on LinkedIn, where I post more content. The website is dsmsports.net, where you can find every episode as well as more content. And of course, follow along, subscribe to the podcast on your preferred podcast platform. Just a fantastic show for you guys today. Really enjoyed this conversation. Talked so much about athlete marketing, about building player brands, building athlete brands, and as well as putting together brand deals. My guest on the podcast today is Dakota Crawford. He is the head of marketing at Market Price. They are an athlete marketing platform doing a lot of work, especially in the NIL space with college athletes. We talk about Market Price. We also talk about a lot about his time helping to run the social player development program for the NHL, the National Hockey League, as well as his time marketing drivers at IndyCar. So Dakota is just a wealth of knowledge in this space, really gets it, and he is going to come at you with a ton of great insights. Stick around for that. But first, a quick word on kind of the flavor of the day, and it's not going anywhere, and that is AI. Google released their AI Bard, which is kind of like their answer to ChatGPT. Of course, we had Microsoft with their big event introducing their integrations with ChatGPT, as well as the latest integrations with Bing. And you still have, everyone is playing with ChatGPT. You have the image creators like DALL-E and Stable Diffusion out there as well. And AI is certainly having a moment. It's at its inflection point, and it's not going anywhere. You're already using AI likely in your everyday roles, whether it's a special filter or something you're doing on Photoshop or whatever it might be. There's a lot of AI we're already using. But of course, this generative AI, where you get to put a prompt into something, have it create something, is certainly a whole new bag of tools to have at your disposal. And a lot of people are saying, well, will AI and the generative AI platforms replace marketers, social media managers, copywriters, creatives, etc.? And certainly not yet, anytime too soon. At least that seems to be the consensus. And it's more so about how you can use these platforms as inspiration. There's a lot of data in there, and if you learn how to use the right prompts, you can get some great answers and great ideas as well. So whether it's testing out Facebook ad copy, or what you should put in for a Twitter or Instagram caption, or even testing to see what your voice should sound like. Put in one of your captions or ideas and tell it to make it more sassy or make it more inclusive, whatever it might be. You can get some ideas to make sure that your voice is projecting the right way. You can even ask it what your voice is like. I put a prompt into ChatGPT asking it to describe the voice and personality of the @Canes, the Carolina Hurricanes on Twitter, and it gave me a pretty good answer. So super interesting there. You can also use some of these image creators to help with conveying your ideas to the creatives you're working with. It won't be the final product from those platforms, but you can still help convey those ideas and give your creatives that inspiration that you're looking for as well. And be careful with those overall, of course. There's still some lawsuits going on with Stable Diffusion and Getty, among other lawsuits at play there. So certainly something to be watchful for sure. But play around with these AI platforms. It's good to get that knowledge, get that experience on there, have a POV, understand how it may be able to help you. Don't be afraid of it. Think about how it can help you do your job better. So that's this episode's kind of opening thought. Think about it, talk about it. This AI stuff's not going anywhere, and it's really interesting and really cool to think about all of the various use cases that we've only begun to scratch the surface of, and it's only going to get better and better. So stick around though, because you're going to learn a ton and take a ton of notes and have so much fun listening to Dakota Crawford of Market Price. Back on the podcast with today's guest, and I am so psyched to be chatting with him. We've already been chatting a ton offline that we could have been recording, but we will now get started. Our guest today on the podcast is Dakota Crawford. He is the marketing manager for Market Price. And welcome to the podcast today, Dakota.
Neil, thanks for having me. We'll have to dig into the first conversation. Maybe we'll have a B-side for this podcast that we can drop later. But yeah, it's really been great catching up with you. So great to put a face to the name. We've been connected for so long, it feels like, on social. Love following you and really excited to chat today. So thanks.
Oh yeah, you have an impressive background. You're doing really cool stuff now with Market Price. But tell us about how you got to where you are. Tell us about your career path, your stops along the way, and any tips for folks that want to do what you do.
Yeah, I've had, I think, a pretty exciting and kind of winding career path. I studied journalism and got my start as a reporter. So I studied at Ball State University in Muncie and got my first job when I was actually finishing up my senior year there. And started writing about Ball State sports and spent about a year in that role. Then I moved to the Indianapolis Star. That was kind of within the same parent company. So it was a natural progression. And I had interned at Indy Star before as well. So that made up the first 2.5, 3 years of my career. Indy Star was really a dream job. I got to I was working on the digital desk at that point. So helping run social accounts, managing the website, writing kind of SEO and quick hit social stories, things like that. But they also used my role as like a backfill reporter. So any given day, I might go to a Pacers game and cover that, or Notre Dame football, or we'll talk more about this later, an IndyCar event, right? So I really loved that work, but as I'm sure any other young journalist or journalism students out there who might be listening can understand and appreciate, it is a scary career path to be on in today's world. Layoffs were a constant reality. So I loved that company. I loved that newsroom. But when an opportunity came up kind of organically to jump over to IndyCar, which I went from Indy Star to IndyCar, which is kind of a fun rhyme to be able to throw in on your LinkedIn. I jumped on it, and that was kind of my springboard right into the SM sports space. So I think one piece of advice that comes in organically here too is like the work that you do on any given day is always a networking opportunity. I don't know if people always think about it that way, but the contacts who I had at IndyCar were from working at the Speedway for the paper, right? So it's people who I had met, and when the opportunity came up, they knew my name. So they reached out, and that kind of came together organically. And I was at IndyCar for 1.5 years. I was a one-person social team for most of that time. It was chaotic and fun and challenging. Traveled with the series, and I learned a lot there. I got really my creative start, because up to that point, right, I had been a writer, I had been running social accounts, but I had never created content. And what I realized pretty quickly in that role is we do not have enough content to fuel these channels. So that's where I got my hands into Photoshop and Premiere and the rest of the Adobe suite. And really, that set me up for another pivot. So after about 1.5 years there, I applied for a job. It was really a cold application with the National Hockey League to help them kick off a player publishing program. They were launching this back in November of 2019. And I said, this is what I've done at IndyCar. This is how I've helped support the drivers here in building their brands and, posting on their social channels. And I think I could help you kick this off really well. And they brought me out to New York for an interview, and the rest is history. It was a really fun 2.5 years there building that program. I needed, again, like this, it really turned into a dream job. I loved that role, loved the team there. I was on a social team of, I think at the time it was 18 people. And being on a team that big is like, it's special, man. You don't get a lot of opportunities like that in social where you can be so hyper-focused on one thing. It's like Dakota gets to show up today and only think about how to help players build their social presence. And in the other roles I've been in, it's like you have to wear 12 hats all the time, right? When you're in the social space. So that was a gift. I loved it, but I really needed the remote flexibility in my personal life. And NHL was, after the pandemic, they were keen on keeping people at the New York office. So I started poking around and found this really cool opportunity with Market Price. This company is, for anyone who's listening and doesn't know, it is a startup in the athlete marketing space that is a two-sided marketplace for athletes and brands to close marketing deals. And again, I'm back in a role now where I wear a lot of hats. We'll dive into what the day-to-day work looks like more, I'm sure. But we're having a lot of fun building this company. We just celebrated 2 years today, and I've been here for 7 going on 8 months of that 2 years. So
very, very cool. And I love how there's a sort of theme that we'll get into a little bit of, like with IndyCar, you're helping oftentimes marketing drivers, and then you're marketing NHL players. And now you're helping connect athletes and brands, and athletes market themselves. And it's really cool to hear about that. And I kind of want to also hear like what that moment was like when you started to shift from I'm a writer to I am a social media strategist and content creator, and understood what that entailed. Like, what was that learning curve like when you got to IndyCar and realized, hey, I need to skill up and become this content creator and social strategist and learn these platforms front and back?
You know what drives me is I'm a competitor. And when I was at IndyCar, I saw the incredible content that NASCAR put out, that F1 put out. And I wanted to be on that level. And it wasn't realistic based on the more limited resources and the bandwidth that I had as a one-person social team. But in addition to being competitive, I'm also just like eternally curious and always wanting to learn new skills. So everything that I learned is, quote unquote, self-taught. It's like YouTubing how to use Photoshop, how to do this thing. And I was just talking to a colleague today about like she is kind of learning Photoshop, and there are things now that I take for granted that I don't even think about, that I thought back to my early NHL days and my IndyCar days. And I was like, man, it is such a steep learning curve. But for me, that learning curve is really, really fun. It's fun to get into, feel uncomfortable, and kind of have to find that growth within that. So I think occasionally it can be detrimental because I'm so attracted to new challenges that it's always going to lead me to like potentially pivot in my career. And I think, at the end of the day, that can hurt you in some ways. If you're not hyper-focused or a specialist at one thing, I think long-term that can have its drawbacks. But to this point in my career, it's been a huge benefit because I've taken on so many different roles. I've had opportunities for growth that, required skills I didn't even think I would need when I graduated college, right? Like it's kind of been this path that shaped itself organically. So I've appreciated it and always look forward to kind of learning a new challenge.
Yeah, I'll tell you something that definitely stood out there, and this went semi-viral recently. Was Matt Navarra, who is known as being the social media newsbreaker and always dropping what's coming in the social platform space. He came out with like these 5 traits that you should look for in a social media person, and one of them was someone that's super curious and we always want to see like what's out there, what's coming next. And so to hear you say that just really resonated, and definitely is a good trait to have for anybody, and certainly someone in the ever evolving, ever changing space of social, and certainly even of athlete marketing right now as well.
It gets baked into the work that we do, right? Like when you're in social, platforms are dropping new releases every like it's sometimes weeks in between updates from any given platform. And now consider that there is a new platform popping up a couple times a year. It's like this field or the social media industry has basically, it's been a prerequisite that you're comfortable with change.
And I want to hear going back to your start with IndyCar, but even just throughout your career of how you developed your sort of fan engagement like roots and guiding principles, like certainly like give me an idea, I guess, of what your knowledge of IndyCar was like at the time and what fans would want to see, and then how you kind of developed this instinct that has guided you throughout your career, even of what makes for good content, what makes for good fan engagement, and how to go about learning and executing.
Yeah, when I was interviewing at Market Price, I talked to a woman. Her name is Ashley Kummer. I don't know if you've connected with her in the past. She's an SM sports legend in her own right, but I was talking to her and I was like, yeah, I started in journalism. This is what my work has been up to this point. And she also started in journalism, and she dropped this line that I loved. And she said, I was marketing athletes before I knew that I was. And that always stuck with me because at the core of what I learned in college and what I started practicing as a journalist was, how do I take an athlete and humanize them? How do I tell a story that someone who's scrolling through Twitter will take the time to click into and read, right? Like that was at the core of it. My best stories, the things I look back on fondly, aren't gamers or reports about specific things. They're stories that got into like who an athlete was. So I think that is a skill that has guided me always and continues to really support the work that I do at Market Price as well. When I think to your question about how that ties into fan engagement, that's a big part of it, right? Like profiling drivers, putting their personality out there. I think that much like, we've seen this with F1 and Drive to Survive. What that show did is showed a lot of driver personality, and it told a lot of compelling stories. That's what I was trying to do at IndyCar too, was find ways to show off who the drivers were and why you should care about them and want them to win the next race, right? So I think that is like how it organically ties in. But to the same point, there were so many challenges at IndyCar, so many nuances. Like you had to know when race control might make a very controversial call about like when to throw a caution flag and how that affected the race outcome, or God forbid, a big accident, IndyCar has really, they race on ovals, right? Which if you only watch F1, you may not be familiar with, but whether it is Pocono Raceway or Indianapolis Motor Speedway, these are huge oval tracks where cars are going 200 plus miles an hour. So one of the first races that I covered, we actually had this huge accident that involved a driver named Robert Wickens, who ended up being really severely injured. But we were sitting up there for like 30, 45 minutes and we didn't know if he was like, okay, you know, and it's like learning how to cover that on the fly is just it's a unique thing that, at least on my path with journalism, like I didn't study PR or like crisis management or anything like that. So I was in that seat kind of like, okay, what do we do? How do we handle this sense, like with the right sensitivity, with the right kind of like measured approach? So there were little things like that too, that were just unique challenges that came with IndyCar specifically, but still like at the core of my day to day. And when I thought, how can I move the needle for this brand? It goes back to those journalism roots and like, I want to tell the best story I can.
Yeah. And to your point too, like the drivers, the athletes, these are the main characters in these stories, and they always will be. And yet you look back and yes, we had Hard Knocks for years that told us, hey, when you humanize these players, it really makes for bigger fans and more casual fans to tune in. And yet it took until you were hired with the NHL, for example, to have a player publishing program. And even with IndyCar, like give me an idea of, was there that revelation or was there a realization that, hey, the best way for us to build fans is to build fans of drivers more so than building fans of IndyCar? Yes, it goes hand in hand, but what was that like learning like of, and why did it take so long in some cases for us to get to that point where we realize that the best way to build fans is through our athletes?
I think it's tough. You know, you and I were talking earlier about like the early days of social when you had your start at Anaheim, right? And like you're launching these accounts. And I think that you just had several years and IndyCar was probably slightly behind the curve of where other leagues were as far as like investing in digital and prioritizing social media internally and things like that. But, you know, like it's still, there was such a learning curve for like a decade. It's like, how do we exist in these spaces? How comfortable are we putting content out, giving people access, you know, within the team? You talked about that. Like, can the social media guy for IndyCar go into a team truck? Like there are little things like that kind of had to be learned and discovered. I think, and it's just a process that takes time. So when I think about the resources that we had, it's that much harder to say, okay, we're also going to invest now in like specifically promoting drivers and helping them build their brands. Again, at NHL, when it's a team of 18 people, you can put a couple people behind the social player development engine. And I think at smaller leagues and smaller companies, it's just harder to do. It's harder to take on. But when I got there, IndyCar was certainly like specifically and intentionally thinking about it. There's also this nuance with IndyCar that, like, for example, it's a little different than the NHL because drivers they're inherently incentivized to post. Like they want to build the biggest brand that they can, because a big part of what allows you to be a driver is sponsorship money. If you can bring a sponsor that is going to pay to be on your car, guess what? You're a lot more valuable to a team owner who might need to fill a seat and bring sponsorship in the next year. So drivers are excited to build their brands. NHL players at times were very hesitant, right? Like it's a very team first culture there. They don't necessarily need to have the same kind of brand development because if they play well, they're going to get paid and they don't need to bring a sponsorship to the team, right? So part of the challenge I ran into at IndyCar was actually that drivers were already doing the work, or they had support, like they had managers who were doing it for them, and it could feel redundant. So a big part of what I tried to do was figure out, like, how can we divide this into buckets where maybe the league gives you a certain video angle, like an in-car camera will give you a shot of what your lap looked like when you won the race or something that you don't have access to as a driver or through your manager. So it was how to like make a naturally kind of synergetic relationship between the support they had, the access to content that they had, and how could the league support that best?
Yeah, no, I love that word you use, synergistic, of thinking about, like, even whether you're talking to an NHL player or an IndyCar driver, whoever it may be, is, hey, this, if we work together, we're all of our boats are going to rise, and your salary might go up in the future because the HRR is going to go up and the salary cap's going to go up, and so even that matters a little bit. And yes, you can get more sponsors yourself as well. And so when we're thinking about that mixing of channels, mixing of parties to some degree. And I kind of want to hear your insight into whether it's IndyCar or NHL, or both, of how you look at those success objectives. Like when you're talking about, hey, there's the player channels that we may have some, we can look at the public metrics, but we're never going to have the same level of insight into our own channels that, hey, we can look at how do we do last season? Oh, we had this many video views, this many impressions, this many website visits, this many referrals, and you don't have that same level of insight necessarily into the non-owned channel. So how do you kind of juxtapose the O&O, the owned and operated, versus the channels that you don't have as much visibility into?
Yeah. Well, honestly, I've got to give a shout out to your company. In the last half of my time at the NHL, we worked with Greenfly, who did a great job of helping us recap, right? Like what athletes were posting, helping dig into the metrics a little bit. So we actually were pretty, I feel like pretty well equipped to bring reports and say, this was the real tangible payoff of what, the social player development team created and sent to athletes. So that was a huge help. Not to just give a too on the nose plug there, but it was a game changer, right, for us at the NHL. But yeah, I think that's always a challenge. Like, especially again, when you go back to a smaller company like IndyCar, figuring out how to internally say we should be investing our resources in a channel that we don't own, that can be a tough conversation to have at times. I've always tried to look at it as, like you said, rising tides lift all boats. I think that the one concrete stat I've always pointed to is like the athletes will always have a higher engagement rate than the brand channels. They won't always have more followers, but if we're going to tell a story well from the league POV, why wouldn't we want that to also be told on the most engaging platform that we have? So I think that's an easy story to tell internally. It's something that I believe in, like, fully, and it's been my work for the last 3 to 4 years now, right? So yeah, for me, that's how you sell it and that's how you build it.
Yeah. I kind of want to go into, as well, like, certainly you started at the NHL at a time when little did we know, we were months away from a pandemic. And with that, though, came these new paradigms, this new infusion and new huge growth of the creator economy. Yes, it was already around, but we all of a sudden now we had platforms like TikTok, and even Instagram Reels came later, and where it's really it's a lot harder to just, hey, give a player a piece of content and he clicks post, or his agent clicks post, and all of a sudden now the best content is when the player or the athlete literally does it themselves or turns the phone around and takes a selfie video. And we had to realize that. And so, like, when you think about how that affected player marketing in general, and the ability for athletes to not necessarily just be able to say, hey, agent, you take care of this for me, and I'll keep doing my thing, you just post or wherever, like, is that a challenge and opportunity? And is it really just changing the face of athletes overall? And certainly what you're seeing now with Market Price as well, with folks creating their own content.
Yeah, you're really getting into Market Price territory now, which is exciting. I think to take it back to the NHL days, like, there are a couple ways I think of it. One is like kind of this graph of like an x-axis and a y-axis, where one is how good are you at your sport and how influential are you on the field or on the ice or what have you, and the other is how much do I need to put my personality out there? And they're kind of like inverted lines, right? So it's like, if you're Alex Ovechkin, you don't necessarily ever need to do anything that shows off your personality. You just don't. You're good enough at hockey that you have a built-in following, and they're going to be excited if you post anything. It can be a still photo, it can be a highlight of you scoring your 800th career goal, and anything in between, and fans are going to eat it up. If you are a rookie playing in Anaheim, you have a slightly different challenge. And I think you have to come in ready to put yourself out there, build your brand. And that's even more so the case for, the athletes we're working with now at Market Price, who are D1, D2 volleyball players. Like, your performance on the court isn't going to carry you to stardom on social. It's not going to be an inherent amount of engagement for you. Like, your star players will be a Power 5 quarterback or what have you. So yeah, I've always thought of it that way, and I've also tried to, like at the league, we would tell players, we can only do so much for you, first of all, but what we can cover is the base that is your on ice performance. I can help you celebrate your biggest moments on the ice. I can help you have great assets to share to support NHL campaigns like Hockey Fights Cancer or something to post during Pride Month or whatever it might be. But the most engaging thing you can put out is what you are willing to do yourself. It's you putting your face in front of the camera, sharing your personality. I think it's just what you're getting at, Neil, like the TikTok content, like what it takes to really perform well on TikTok is a face and a personality. That was not always very comfortable for NHL players to hear or to think about doing. Some were great at it, but even the most like social savvy, the rookies who we were working with, the Trevor Zegrases, the Cole Caulfields of the world, I think there was still such a there was a hockey culture thing. Like in the locker rooms, you would kind of get chirped at, right? If you were too active on social or if you were doing TikTok dances or whatever it might be. There was this ridiculous era during the pandemic where all of us were locked down, and it's like hockey players were like at home with their wives and doing all the dance challenges. And we're sitting at the league like, whoa, we did it. All of our players are going to be on TikTok. But as soon as hockey came back, it kind of started to fizzle out, right? So yeah, it's an interesting challenge. I think I would tell any college athlete who we work with now, like figure out how to put your personality out there, tell your story, do it authentically. If you get a hype video from the team that you play for, great, post that, but it can't be the only thing that you post.
Yeah. No, even like thinking about your example of like volleyball players as that example, whatever, it might be a first team all conference volleyball player, but I'm also this. I'm all like this. I'm not just a volleyball player because that makes you more. Otherwise, then you're just kind of lost in a sea of sameness when brands are looking at you. Like, hey, we can work with any volleyball player. Why are we going to work with you? And yes, all conference of whatever, the Sun Belt means something, but it means more if you are a volleyball player who is accomplished, but also, is really into makeup or really into gaming or really into cars or whatever it might be. That makes you like stand out a little bit. And I think there's something to that, I'm sure. And
yeah, I agree. Like if you develop your own niche, that's going to help you that much more. Even if you don't have a niche though, like one athlete who I'll shout out specifically, his name is Jake Ferry. He's a Kent State wrestler. He has such a unique, like all the way down, he's from Boston, all the way down to his Boston accent, but kind of just how he carries himself. He's a really fun, loving, like charismatic, loose guy on social. He'll mess around with his teammates and do this really kind of like irreverent content creation. And I think if a brand comes and sees that, even if it's not him saying, I'm irreverent and I love cars or whatever, they still see an opportunity to work with someone who's unique. So it's like, put yourself out there and you're going to attract someone. It may not be your dream brand, might be a brand you've never heard of. That's kind of the magic of Market Price and what we do. We help you make connections, right? But the first step is always putting yourself out there and then seeing, I think, kind of what comes back.
Yeah, and going double clicking a little bit on this idea of differentiating oneself and being unique in some capacity. Like I think back to something you and I talked about a little bit offline is how you guys did a good job at the NHL of helping to infuse personality through the content that you guys were providing players. And all of a sudden now it's not just a sizzle video or a hype reel or a highlight from a game, but it's also like it tells something about that player. And for better or for worse, it builds their brand in some way, some perception by fans. So how much did you guys see at the NHL and even IndyCar to lesser extent perhaps of collaborating with the players and with the athletes, with the drivers to say, hey, this is like, tell us who you kind of want to be. And do you want to be that irreverent? Do you want to be really serious? And like, let's go into like how hard you're working in the gym or whatever between events. Like how much interplay is there and was there? And how important is that to really move the needle?
Yeah, especially at the NHL, it took time to build the relationships that informed the specificity that you're talking about. But Trevor Zegras, by the time that I left the NHL, was my internal poster child of what we could do to support an athlete and also what we could share with other incoming rookies to say, look, this is how you can build out, your social calendar for the first 6 months of your career, because we made sure he was ready to post at every big milestone. It was around the draft. It was then around his NHL debut, around his first goal. And if you're a hockey fan, you know that Trevor Zegras had some incredible viral moments, and we helped him post around those. And I think to this day, it's probably some of the most highest engaging player content that we worked on at the league, because he was able to, post and capitalize around his lacrosse goal, and then later the alley-oop puck pass that blew up all over the internet. So we equipped him to post around those moments, and that's great. And it's kind of like we talked about, like, because he was doing awesome things, he's getting more engagement. So he didn't have to lean into it with his personality to keep those numbers going up. But where it really got special for me, when we think about how we were driving league priorities and supporting the player, my favorite post of all time is Trevor Zegras posting a low light, which is that's what fans ended up calling it. But it was ahead of the Las Vegas All-Star vote, I guess last year. Honestly, time feels like a blur to me. We had Trevor Zegras put out this low light of all of his like audacious attempts at really cool, dazzling plays that failed. Because we saw the highlights, we saw the lacrosse goals, but then we put together this highlight where he would like turn the puck over or try a lacrosse shot that just immediately gets blocked. And not every player was willing to laugh at themselves in that way, but Trevor was. And we learned that after 6 months, a year of working with him through the first stages of his career. And when we sent that post, it drove, like, granted, this is from a tweet, and it's hard to drive traffic from Twitter. You know, that's something that I'm sure everyone in the industry knows. Like, it's such a kind of like an ephemeral space where everyone's scrolling through the timeline so quickly. It's hard to drive traffic out from Twitter. We drove like 10,000 votes to the All-Star page for Trevor from one tweet. And it's because he put out the low light, put a sassy caption with it, and had some fun. And it's like, if you could get if you could even get half of your biggest stars in the game, which I would count Trevor in that group for the NHL, to have that much fun with the content they're putting out, that's not even him in front of the camera like we talked about. That's not the authentic TikTok content that you want, but it's somewhere in the middle. You know, it's taking the on-ice stuff, having a ton of fun with it, and putting it out in a unique way, and that moves the needle. And like, to me, that was the moment where I was like, we did this. You know, like, we really got a player excited, bought in, and posting something that moves the needle for his brand and for the league.
Yeah, I will tell you, I remember that video because I posted about it myself, and it was such an eye-opening light bulb moment for me of like, this is really cool. This is not just another highlight. This is really, you know, building a personality and showcasing his who he is a little bit, which is just really well done. And a couple minutes left here with Dakota Crawford. The time is flying by. He's a marketing manager at Market Price. We'll get to that episode shareable stat in just a moment. But how does it then play into how brands can best work with athletes? And we hear that in the greater economy space too. Don't just give them the script and tell them to read something. Give them what we're trying to get across and let them do it their way. So are you seeing that the best brand and athlete partnerships, activations really have that idea of, hey, the athlete has a bit of say or a little bit of personality imposed into it, or the brand knows who they're working with, so they're not going to give, you know, something that is meant to be funny to someone who is usually not funny or whatever? Like, is that becoming a more important piece of the picture when you guys are creating these partnerships?
I think yes. The way that I view it, honestly, and I'm really speaking now to the work that we're doing at Market Price and the connections that we're driving between athletes and brands. But I think one of the best things a brand can do is kind of just let the athlete do what they do best. And a lot of the student athletes who are on our platform are pretty talented, pretty savvy creators, right? So I think to one of my favorite partnerships, it was Coach working through our platform to hire 5 student athletes to help launch a new line called the Varsity Collection. So they reached out to, this is a really cool thing too. Like, you know, we touched on this earlier, but your Power 5 quarterbacks, your Power 5 star football players and basketball players, they're going to get NIL deals that are coming to them. Brands are going to be knocking on their door. What's really cool about what Market Price has done really well in the last year, especially, is we're connecting brands like Coach to athletes like Cameron Basden, who is a cheerleader at the University of Central Florida. It's not who you think of when you think of NIL, right? But Coach hired 5 athletes. And what was really cool about the brief is they're like, tell your story. the tagline was "Put me in, coach." That was the whole thing, and every athlete, each of the five, took a unique spin on that and how they would feel excited about partnering with coach. And like Alex Glover, SMU volleyball player, she's a really great creator, but her whole thing was like, I came for freshman orientation like 6 years ago, and I had my coach bag here, and now here I am as, you know, a sixth year senior or whatever with the coach bag again, and it comes full circle. So like the way I see it, it's like brands look at these athletes and let them do what they do best. Let them create and tell a story.
And then what are brands typically looking for when they are looking at athletes? Are they looking at this person gets a high engagement rate, or this person creates really good content, or this person has a lot of followers, or this person, it comes from this demographic that we're really interested in, or this person, you know, XYZ? Like, what are some of those things that stand out and that are also table stakes in some ways?
I definitely think those are all part of it. You know, like for us, when brands use market price, they're going to be able to scroll through athlete applications and look at a profile page that shows some of the things you talked about. They can see the baseline social data around the athlete's demographics, who follows them, and where do those people live. They can see engagement rate and start to make an informed decision on, within the actual post, are they going to move the needle in a way that we want to? Are they going to reach a specific audience that we care about? So that's one part of it. But I also think that, you know, shout out to our guys at Gondola. In much the same way that creatives have to pitch themselves and say, this is what I can create. You know, if you're a freelance creative, like, this is what I can do and you should hire me. Athletes are kind of doing the same thing. And I think, like Alex Glover, I brought her up earlier. When brands go look at her feed now and see like Oka plant-based energy drink and coach and everything in between, and how she's created and told stories around these brands, they're like, oh, she can work with us too. I think that kind of portfolio is just as important.
Yeah. Last before you're here, Dakota, and I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, but not too much, is like, thinking about this greater creator economy space and influencer space. What is the inherent advantage, if there is one, that athletes have? Like, why as a brand should I go to a place like an athlete or a place in marketplace versus a Grin or any of those other influencer marketplaces where I can find creators or find influencers that have sizable followings and are good at creating content? What is that leg up for athletes?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are natural fits with athletes. That's where I'd start. Like, if you are a fitness brand, if you sell anything in the physical or mental health space, like, you're going to be able to partner with people who are very fit, perform at a very high level. It's the same reason we would say that Tom Brady is a good endorsement partner, but at a different scale, right? They're not bringing a 12 million like audience from their Instagram, but they are bringing the same kind of like, you know, the intangible athlete like skill set. They're go-getters, they're competitors, and they've proven that they can do things at a really high level. I think pretty much anyone at the D1, even D2 level, like, that's something a brand should want to be associated with. So I think athletes bring the edge.
It's the aspirational aspect in some sense.
Exactly. Yeah. You know, it's just like another athlete, Keely Davis. She's a volleyball player who we work with as well. She's like really cool, really funny, great personality. She puts out this interesting content, but then she's also going to mix in these clips of her like doing really impressive things on the court. And it's an edge that creators don't bring, that the aspirational part that you're talking about in general. Some creators are, like a fitness creator might bring the same edge that an athlete brings, but I think that's built in for just about every athlete that you would partner with.
Oh, I love that. There's so many more things that I want to ask you about, Dakota. We will have some more fun in our Crawford Quips segment. But first episode, Shareable Stat, coming up right now. What a great chat with Dakota Crawford, head of marketing at Market Price. Really enjoyed hearing his stories, his examples, his insights. Really gets it and does a great job in his role and in his previous roles as well. We're going to have some from Dakota coming up, so stick around for those quick hitting questions. But first, this episode's shareable stat. This episode's shareable stat comes from a recent video that went viral across social platforms, and that was from the Detroit Red Wings, and it came from their game. We always say this a lot if you read my content, that there's a lot of great content coming out of your video board at games. Whether it's a good dance cam or a kiss cam or any other fans doing crazy things or players doing crazy things as well. And in this case, the Red Wings had a young fan of the game named George go viral, and as the crowds were booing when they showed Canucks fans and cheering when they showed George in his Red Wings outfit and Red Wings fandom, and just the cheering and booing back and forth made for a great video clip. And George, being the adorable young man that he is, also earned the love of fans, of course, in Detroit, but also across social media. And the stat I want to share with you to get to it is 2 million plays on TikTok just 8 hours later. Yes, it also went viral on Twitter as well as Instagram Reels and elsewhere. But want to call it the TikTok because you don't think about TikTok so much as a live platform. I did recently come across a Digiday article speaking with a few thought leaders in the industry about TikTok becoming an increasingly second screen platform, especially when it comes to sports and live events you're taking in. Do you want to go to TikTok to follow along as opposed to another platform, whether it's Twitter or your group chat or whatever it may be? And I think in this case, yes, TikTok is not the primary second screen for sports, but timing does matter. We like to think of TikTok as being a place where time doesn't matter as much. And it doesn't in a lot of cases, especially if it's great evergreenish content. Player personalities or fun clips and highlights. But when it comes to something that's really in the moment like that, that's going to go viral, that already is going viral on Twitter, that time can matter because if you don't put it up on your account, someone else and other people, and a lot of people are going to beat you to it. And TikTok's algorithm will recognize that. A lot of users that would have seen your video have already seen this video. They are stamping those video files to recognize and not repeat in someone's For You page, for example. So again, like TikTok, the time does not matter as much as it does other places, like Twitter, of course. But it can matter, especially for something that you are pretty confident is going to take off, and that if you don't put it up soon, someone else will beat you to it. So that's a shareable stat. Comes from the Detroit Red Wings TikTok. Got over 2 million plays in the first 8 hours after posting a great video board clip of young George. All right, that's a shareable stat. Think about it, talk about it, ponder it, but more importantly, stick around for some more fun and insight from Dakota Crawford. Right back from this episode of Shareable Stat, and I'm joined once again by Dakota Crawford. He is marketing manager for Market Price. Dakota, you kicked ass in your interview. Are you now ready to give us some Crawford quips?
Let's dive into some Crawford quips. The first conversation was great. I think this one might be better. So let's dive in.
Bar is high. All right. Number one, you talked about working at the Muncie Star Press and coming up as a journalist. So tell me, during your time working for the Muncie Star Press or Indy Star, tell me your favorite story that you worked on or wrote for that publication.
I'm going to cheat and I'll quickly give you one from each. At the Muncie Star Press, it is a story that was headlined "The Dark Side of a Player in the Spotlight." There was a center on the men's basketball team. His name is Trey Moses. He was this incredible kid. He worked in the community. He worked with Best Buddies, and he went viral for a prom proposal tied to Taylor Swift. Do you know Trey? I see your face lighting up.
No, I'm just enjoying the story. I love the.
Okay. Well, he was this incredible kid, and then I got to know him a little bit when I was on the beat covering the team. Found out that he had dealt with a lot of mental health issues that you wouldn't assume based on how outgoing and how happy he always looked on his feed, right? So the story was essentially here's this kid who is literally showing up to the basketball arena in the middle of the night, trying to figure out how to find his peace and his mental health, while also doing this incredible stuff in the community. So I wrote that story and it always stuck with me. And, it's the same thing we talked about, finding the human element in a player. That's the same thing I was doing then that I try to do now when we connect athletes and brands. So always loved that one. Indy Star, it was a story. What was the headline? The sacrifices a married WNBA couple makes raising newborn twins. And this was a story about DeWanna Bonner and her partner, Candace Dupree. So a couple WNBA, I'm wearing the W hoodie today, so feel good bringing this one up. But it was about how they were going to raise a child while they were both playing. And one of them took a season off and they had twins. And it was just this really cool story. That is one that I discovered as a reporter. I was like covering the post-game interviews and saw babies getting passed around the locker room. So I was like, hey, whose babies are these? And it turned into this really cool story about how they took a season off in Indianapolis as, you know, a gay married couple. Like there were just a lot of really interesting life dynamics for them to work through. And they were professional athletes who were competing at a really high level through all of that. So I really love that story as well. That's one from each.
Those are awesome, and it just speaks to again the theme of what we've been talking about too, of the stories behind that off the court or off the field or whatever. Number two, we're gonna talk about your alma mater, Ball State. Tell me, who is the most well-known or accomplished athlete that's come out of Ball State?
Yeah, there were a few options here. I did some research last night to make sure that I wasn't talking out of my hat, but I think it has to be Brad Maynard. 15 years as a punter. We know there are only so many punting jobs in the NFL. He was also, fun fact, he was the first D1 player at the time, this is a long time ago, but to ever be named a conference's defensive player of the year in the Mid-American Conference. He was a punter and got that title. So That shows you the impact he had at Ball State, and then went on to the long professional career. So I think it's got to be Brad.
There we go. Ball State producing all-time punters. I love that.
Right, sure.
Number three, you can give multiple answers to this one if you want, because we talked about, I have an idea of who you would say off the top of your head, perhaps, based on our interview. So tell me your favorite NHL players to work with during your time there with the league.
Yeah, it's Trevor Zegras. Like I said, he had such a willingness to try new fun things, to put himself out there on social, to tie his really, really dynamic personality into what we created for him in a way that a lot of players weren't. He helped really kind of further the cause and drive the mission forward for our social player development program. And he was just really a joy to work with. Something we didn't get to talk about before, but is just worth noting. We would send him stuff and literally not touch a caption suggestion at all, because Trevor would write these captions that were like 6 emojis, and that's all he would post. But fans loved it. Like it's like a UFO emoji and a Z sleeping emoji, and that would be his caption. So we didn't even try to like entertain that or fill that kind of need for him, because he just authentically brought this kind of like fun, irreverent tone to everything he did on social. So huge Trevor Zegras fan. Shout out to the Anaheim Ducks. They were great partners as well. But yeah, that's my guy at the NHL.
Hell yeah. Well, as a noted Ducks fan myself, I will have no qualms with Z. Good one there. Number four. You may have talked about this one as well, but you can give another one if you want. The most memorable athlete social post or content from your time in the NHL, and you can give multiple ones if you need to.
Yeah, we've already talked at length about Z. So I kind of try to think back to a post that moved the needle in a different way. And Josh Morrissey had a really cool, touching story about his losing his father to cancer. And we were creating Hockey Fights Cancer content with him. He had a purple jacket that had like a custom lining that he wore in honor of his father to like one of the Winnipeg Jets Hockey Fights Cancer night. And he then auctioned it off to raise money, again, in his father's name. So we were able to get some really cool video of him talking about his father's story. We had video of him walking down the hall, coming to the game, and just edited a really nice kind of, again, like touching, sentimental piece that at the time was so significant to us, because we were able to help a player tell a story that meant so much to them. But also, you know, it's in support of an NHL campaign that we had to find a way to like tell stories around. So we posted that at the time. The collab feature on Instagram was still very new. And it's like, it was so cool to have this storytelling piece that meant so much to both parties to like go up on Josh's account and the NHL's account. And at the time I was just like over the moon about that one, just like I was about the Zegras post, in a much different way that we talked about before.
That's incredible. That's like what collab is all about, or what collab should be, is when you're helping a player get something out that he wants to get out, and it's, you know, better for both of you all. That's fantastic. Number five, going back to a little bit of your insight of having the time at IndyCar and seeing just the explosion of F1, you know, since Drive to Survive and in the last few years as well. What can IndyCar do to to try to stay relevant as F1 grows in the States more than ever, and IndyCar still has this tradition, still has Indy 500 and all that. What can or should IndyCar be doing to try to keep alive in the decades to come?
I think it's kind of a cop-out answer if you are familiar with IndyCar and what it is, but if you're not, maybe this answer is a little more interesting to you. But to me, it all comes down to the Indianapolis 500. This is a month-long event where drivers are competing to qualify for the race. A couple years ago, well, I guess it's been a few years now, but we had Fernando Alonso, who was a premier F1 driver at the time, come and try to make the field of 33 for the Indianapolis 500. He failed to qualify. It was an incredibly widely read story across the globe. And I think that was the best example of the drama that the Indy 500 brings and how much it can move the needle. If they could do that consistently and do like a Drive to Survive style level of storytelling through the month of May at IMS, it's like the stories you can tell are incredible. That race defines careers for guys. They get one shot at it a year. And the guys who win it multiple times, like, they become legends. Takuma Sato is a driver who I worked a lot with when I was at IndyCar. He's a legend in Japan because he won Indy twice, and the drivers, like, it's all they care about. We have 17 races in IndyCar. Indy 500 is always the one that they're like focused on. So that month has so much like prestige and just like passion that comes from the drivers. If you can tap into that, you would pull new viewers in. It's a huge challenge. It's not easy to create what Drive to Survive is, but IndyCar, I think, has a platform that's even more compelling than what F1's like season schedule is at Indy.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good insight. It's a good call out because with F1, you have a season and you're competing for the Constructors' Championship or the individual crown, and it's basically Max Verstappen or Lewis Hamilton every year. And with Indy 500, like, you don't necessarily know who's going to win year to year, and you're working toward this one singular event, and that kind of drama, that buildup can really be powerful.
Yeah, it's the parody too, the parody, the passion. You get all of that. Not to say there's not passion at F1 because we know there is, but it's certainly a different kind of competition. And I think that anyone can win this 500-mile race on one day in May is such an incredible story to tell.
Yeah, every driver submits their milk needs, and so every driver has a chance to drink that milk at the end of the day.
What a weird tradition. That's a documentary in and of itself, I think.
Number 6 for you, Dakota. Tell me your favorite activation so far that's come out through the marketplace.
This one's top of mind because we just closed the deal this week, but we helped a high school football player, a young woman named Bella, land her first NIL deal. She made history in California as the first girl to score multiple touchdowns in a varsity football game. She was a national storyline several months ago when that happened. Her team then went through the state tournament. I think they won like a division championship. And now Bella is looking into college. She is not trying to play any sport at the next level. So she's a really unique kind of athlete for us to work with. Yeah. And we reached out through our athlete engagement team and said, hey, Bella, are you trying to capitalize on your NIL? If so, let's talk. And when she got on the phone with our team, she said, I don't want to go out and secure 10 NIL deals. I'm not interested in like turning myself into a billboard or my social feed into a billboard, but I'm really passionate about 2 or 3 things. One of them is mental health. So we helped Bella connect with an app that tracks behaviors on your smartphone and helps you kind of monitor your mental health in a really tech-driven and tangible way. So now Bella is partnering with KeyWise, and we just announced this NIL partnership this week, and it's been covered by like 25 outlets. Shout out to a lot of people who responded to my request this week to check Bella's story out, but everyone from Highlight Her to Together to ESPN, SportsCenter, On3, that's a really big publication in the NIL space, and everyone in between talked about Bella's story. And it was really incredible for us to bring this partnership together and then see it make such a huge splash. And not to mention all of the girls who like look up to Bella, and you see them in the comments being inspired by her. It's really special to be a part of that. So
That's fantastic. There's so much good to that. That's so good. I love that. Number seven. It's time for our food question. Got to ask the food question. So tell me, if you and I go hang out together in Indiana, what's the best meal to get, and where are we getting it?
Yeah, man, you're gonna make fun of me for this, but the go-to is always St. Elmo's in downtown Indy. They have this this world famous shrimp cocktail. I think if you're in the city for like a night or two, it's gonna be St. Elmo, or their sister restaurant is called Harry and Izzy's. So you can get the shrimp cocktail at kind of a discount there. So I think that's the headline go-to, but I'll throw out an underdog just so you're not too disappointed in me. There's a little place kind of tucked in an alley downtown Indy. It's called Pearl Street Pizza. It's kind of just like bar food, get a good pizza. It's low key, much different than the St. Elmo vibe. But I'd throw those two out as kind of go-to spots if you're in the city.
All right, so I have to know at St. Elmo's, besides the shrimp cocktail, is the rest of the food pretty good, or are you just basically you eat the shrimp cocktail, then lose all your senses, and you're done?
Yeah, you get in there, you lose your senses, and you go home. No, they have I think it's like a cool steakhouse ambience. It's kind of like low lighting and feels very rich inside. So it's an experience in and of itself. If you're a red meat eater, you're gonna get a steak that's pretty good. I'm not a big steak guy myself. I'm probably selling the shrimp cocktail more than anything, but yeah, there's some good food on the menu there too.
There you go. Go to St. Elmo, clear out your sinuses, and you will be all set. Last one for you here, Dakota. Tell me the brand that's not yet on Marketplace that you most want to see an athlete work with.
Yeah, so I thought about this and I could go in a couple different directions, but I'm going to shout out Elf Cosmetics. If you or if anyone listening to the show knows the people who are running the brand accounts at Elf Cosmetics, give me a call. We worked with a Florida State athlete. Her name is Michaela Edenfield. She is a star softball player. And we've done this content series where we ask players, what's your dream deal? And it's pretty straightforward. You could get a pretty boring answer. A lot of athletes say something like Nike or Under Armour. And it's like, well, cool. Every athlete in the world wants to be sponsored by Nike or Adidas, right? But Michaela came with this really cool, very specific answer about how she would love, like she loves makeup. She always does her makeup before she goes and plays. So that's a big part of her brand. She does like get ready with me before her games at Florida State. And she has these incredible, like eye-catching looks that she brings out as a player. And she says, I would love to launch a line with Elf and make an affordable product that any girl who follows me and comes to my games could buy. So we told this story and put it out on social. And for our accounts, these are big numbers, but we got like 15,000 video views and literally hundreds of comments, particularly from the Florida State camp where fans are like, hey, Elf, give her this deal. And my children will never wear any other product. It was really cool to see the FSU fan base rally around that. And it is the most like natural fit, I think, that you could really dream up between an athlete and a brand. So I pitched that out. Still haven't gotten a response from Elf, but man, I would love it if we did.
That's super cool. It's kind of like the like tweet into existence kind of a philosophy of tell the brand that you want to work with them and show why, and maybe look on.
Yeah. We pulled it off too. I don't know if you saw, Neil, the video with Devin Miller from Marshall and Dr. Squatch, but we put the post out on social and it worked. And Dr. Squatch partnered with this kid. He's a tight end at Marshall who doesn't have companies knocking on his door with NIL opportunities. And it was just us shooting our shot on social and having fun with a very tongue-in-cheek, like kind of sassy brand in Dr. Squatch. But they responded. So, like they say, closed mouths don't get fed. So we're going to put it out there and see who's interested in working with our athletes. So
that's great. And it speaks to market price, that your guys' philosophy of being athlete first and really helping the athletes themselves. That's really cool. All right, Dakota.
Yeah. Athletes are our heroes. They're the face of everything we do, but I cut you off, Neil. I think it's time to get a sign off in here.
Oh, it's your chance first. You get to take over the podcast for me right now, and you get to tell us your social media all-star to follow. Dakota, tell us what platform they're on, who they are, and why they're worth following.
Yeah, I'm going to throw out a couple goats who I love following: Amy Keene, Tyson Hutchins. If I'm looking for job opportunities or I'm looking to connect with someone, Amy Keene is like the go-to. She has taken so much time out of her life to connect with me. I've always appreciated her being so open. I know she's been on your show as well. And same thing with Tyson. Like if you're talking about the person to follow to like understand the trends and what's happening in the creative space. He's the guy. And the one that I'm going to throw out as a sleeper is my guy Juan from the NHL. I connected with him there. He's a really, really talented video creator, Juan Morales. I would encourage everyone to go connect with this kid. I know he just launched his own podcast, not to plug a competitor on your show. But he's a great kind of young gun, under the radar creative you should have on your radar.
Very nice. Some good calls there, and a podcast we're checking out perhaps as well. We don't have competitors anyway. We love anyone talking about the greater social media and digital media sports space.
Love that. We're all friends.
That's great. All right. And how about you, Dakota? Where can we find you, as well as, of course, all things Market Price across digital social media?
Yeah, I'm on every platform at Dakota Crawford _ except for TikTok, where I live as Market Price. You can find Market Price again on all the channels at Market Price. Give me a follow. Help me leverage my way into a raise maybe in the new year. Go engage with some posts for me. We would appreciate it. But yeah, having a lot of fun running the Market Price accounts. And again, Neil, thanks for the time. It was so nice to connect and talk all things sports social with you.
Likewise, man. It's so great to pick your brain, hear your insights from your career, and hear about what you're doing out at Market Price. Just great stuff. And thanks so much for taking the time today. Thank you so much again to Dakota Crawford, head of marketing at Market Price. Really cool to follow him throughout his career, doing awesome stuff at Market Price right now. I love seeing the deals they help put together. I cannot thank him enough for coming on the podcast today, telling great stories, giving us great insight, great knowledge, great examples, and really appreciate Dakota giving us his time. But that'll do it for this episode of the Digital and Social Media Sports Podcast. Thanks again for listening. As always, I'm your host, Neil Horowitz. You can find me on Twitter, NJH287, also on LinkedIn, where I post more content. The website for all of it is dsmsports.net. And of course, I look forward to seeing you hopefully on your favorite podcast platform and following along with this very podcast. Until next time, this is Neil Horowitz signing off for the Digital and Social Media Sports Podcast.